Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Ultimate Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call. 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, he is my co-host all the way from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It is Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
It's spring.
It finally, after a million months later. But yeah, it's here.
Yep. The snow has finally melted, finished melting a couple of days ago. And then this beautiful, beautiful South Dakota wind just came and blew everything dry.
Yeah, that outdoor automation system just doesn't seem to work as well as the indoor one does.
Love it.
Gets a little too hot and a little too cold. You want to tackle some feedback?
Why not?
Our first email comes in from Matt. Matt writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I started using Mini Diary a few years ago after Noah recommended it on the show, but I see it's no longer maintained. Do you have any recommendations for an Encrypted Journal app to use as a replacement that could also sync across multiple devices? Thanks for making a great show each week, Matt." So it's kind of funny. I had switched from Mini Diary over to a different app called EncryptPad. For the purpose, really, it wasn't because I saw that Mini Diary was no longer maintained. It was really because I wanted dark mode. And Mini Diary has like this, it has the, journaling, I guess, table of contents style thing. And I really just want to just play notes. So I wanted a simpler UI. So I'd switched to EncryptPad and I thought, oh, that's great. I'll recommend EncryptPad. And I went to EncryptPad. Yeah, the last time they made an update was in 2022. So that may also be unmaintained. So in general, I would tell you that your options are, if you're starting at the top, you might start with something like Joplin. Joplin is a open source note app that will do all of the things in the way of creating notebooks, and you can create notes and all the rest of it. It does support encryption. However, the encryption appears to not be local. It appears to be for their synchronization. So they support a number of different synchronizations. They have their own sync thing. You can use Dropbox, you can use OwnCloud, you can use WebDAV. So they support a number of different sync options to include ones that are open source, and that's where the encryption plays in. But if it doesn't appear anyway that the notes are encrypted on your local device. So I would be aware of that just going into it. A second option, which I like slightly less than Joplin, is Standard Notes. Standard Notes is the answer you would get if you went into likely many of the chat rooms or on Reddit. It's technically open source. It does do client-side local encryption. What I don't like about Standard Notes, and haven't from the day that I tried it, it has this weird cloud-like dependence that isn't really there. I don't really know how to explain it. But so, for example, you can pay for a $90 a year and you can get their productivity plan, or you can pay $120 and get their professional plan. But at least the last time that I used it, weird things like themes were something that you had to pay extra for. I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay you $90 a year so that I can turn on dark theme. I will absolutely pay you $90 a year because I like the product that you're providing to me, and it provides tremendous value to my life, and I want to support you developing. That I'll pay $90 a year. I'll pay $120. I'll pay $500 a year all day long. But the idea that themes are a premium feature is just a little weird to me. And the other thing that I don't like about it is all like they do all of the hosting. Like you can use it client side, or you could just shut off the syncing. But it just feels too tied to a service to me for me to really recommend it with all sincerity. So I've used it. I think my wife is still using it as kind of her go-to. She can download a thing. Again, it's real popular with journalists. It does support encryption, seems to stand up. And obviously they're available the source code is available. So all the things that I'm complaining about the free app that I downloaded, you could technically go fix if you were so inclined to. So you can check them out at standardnotes.com. Joplin, you'll find at joplinapp.org. EncryptPad, I'll have a link for you to their GitHub page in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. But here's something else you might consider. You might consider foregoing or separating into separate categories the technological solution of providing the encryption and the technological solution of a journal app. And so, Steve, this is where I'm going to look to you. You do a decent amount of encryption, but you, as you would describe it, the old curmudgeon way. Can you talk a little bit about why you do it that way, what it is, and what some of the benefits are to keeping it simple?
So I use GPG, and it's largely because I'm just an old salty guy. Like, this thing worked for me, and it's relatively safe. I'm sure there are flaws, and you can crack it and all the rest of that if given enough time. But at the same time, where someone's going to take that amount of effort to get at what's in here is pretty inconsequential to me. So essentially, all that I do is I GPG a tarball, a gun-zipped tarball, and I push it up to Nextcloud so it can sit there encrypted, and I sync it around and stuff like that. And when I want it, I pull it out. I pull out my key, which is not everywhere because that would be bad. And, there's a password on the decryption key, and then I just dump it back to the tarball, untar it, do my business, tar it back up, and it syncs away. So largely it's one of those things, like, you could do it in some sort of automated fashion, I'm sure. It's not worth it to me. Like, the steps to encrypt and decrypt are so minimal that I would rather do this by hand and walk through the process than have my automation accidentally fail, or, just some other process. Because honestly, part of it is it keeps you sharp. Not that GPG is hard. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. But one of the things that I preach in my job is that automation is good. Too much automation is bad, because you end up losing the ability to cope with problems or understanding how the underlying technology works if you've automated it all away. And I apply that to things like encryption and stuff like that. And so I know there are people out there that think I'm off my rocker, but I maintain this as a IT professional. I've been in so many places where it's like, well, what's that automation do? Well, we don't know, and Bob left, so we just left it alone. Like, we leave it alone, don't touch it.
Magic scripts.
Exactly.
That right? is a fireable offense at AltaSpeed.
So, yeah, the old curmudgeon in me is like, I started doing this in 2004, and I just kept that habit all the way through.
So one of the downsides to doing it this way, right, is you're having to decrypt and re-encrypt every time you want to make a change, right? So if you did this, it would work, it would stay secure, all the things, but you're essentially rolling your notes into an encrypted container and you're pulling them back out every time you're wanting to make a change, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could use the GUI method where you're using the archive roller, and something like, is it Seahorse? That's the GUI application that gives you the ability to insert a key and then decrypt a file, like in the UI. So you could absolutely do that, just like you do with a tarball, right? Like in anything like Dolphin or Nautilus or whatever, if you double click on a tarball, it'll show you the files, and then you could double click to open the file, and it will create some sort of temporary file. When you save and close it, it puts it back into the tarball, and then the tarball closes and you're done. You could absolutely do it that way. I just don't.
How about using Lux? Could you see building like a Lux container, or having like creating essentially an image file and creating a Lux file system on top of that, and then mounting that when you're trying to work inside of your encrypted, as we would put it this way, I suppose, little encrypted file system?
Yeah, you absolutely can do that. I don't have any particular feelings about that one way or the other. It wasn't something that occurred to me back in the day, and I carried it forward. I will say one of the things that my friend does is he actually uses, I can't remember what it is, but it essentially creates a hidden encrypted section in your home directory, and he actually stores a VM in there, and then the VM has a password, and then he's got the encryption inside the VM on a drive inside of the VM. So wow. Like he takes it much further than I do.
So is that like a Veracrypt thing, or is that like a KDE Vaults type of a thing?
I can't remember. It's more generic than KDE Vaults. Someone out there in the audience, 100% will write in and tell me what it's called, because it's been around for a long time. And it was some utility you can find in Ubuntu from way back in the day, where you were just able to apt install whatever it was, and it creates, I think what it does is creates like a sparse file, and then encrypts the sparse file and hides it. I think that's what is happening in the background.
So with vaults, you can do CryFS, I think EncFS and GoCryptFS, I think are the three options. And so they're generic things. They're just kind of rolled into a nice little utility. But yeah, it would be interesting if somebody does write in live at asknoahshow.com. I'd be interested in different ways to do this, more ways. And really, if you think about it, if you look at what Snowden did, right, he didn't rely on just one encryption method. He put everything in, well, at that time it was TrueCrypt, and then inside of like a LUX, the drive itself was encrypted and then stored it that way. So you might consider two different versions of encryption and two different steps. That way, if one fails, you've kind of got a backup in there. Our second email comes in from Joey. Joey writes in and says, "Hey, Noah, USPS in my area is a joke. Of the 5 important things I get each year, they lose half of them. And yet they can get 10 pieces of junk mail and my neighbors mail into my mailbox every day. So about a year ago, I switched to traveling mailbox, and I've been pleased. The best part is, for whatever reason, USPS knows it's a virtual mailbox and is yet to forward a single piece of junk mail to my traveling mailbox address." So I appreciate you writing in. That's a follow-up to last week's feature segment where we talked about privacy-respecting mail. How do you get U.S. mail to join the 21st century? And so feedback from a service called Traveling Mailbox. Again, they're the ones that have kind of the dedicated app that you can do a lot with. So,
hey, Noah.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that struck me about this, so I was talking with some neighbors of mine who are in their 50-something, and I was just giving them a synopsis of last week's episode.
Yeah.
And they're like, so they're down the road from me, and they're like, "Can we get KNOX down here?" And it's like, I don't think so. They got a pretty broad reach, but I don't think it's down there. And they asked whether KNOX streams online. And I was like, you know what? I actually don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, we do. KNOXradio.com.
So the reason it ties in here is because they're not technical people, but they were super interested in the conversation about the safe mailboxes, like the private mailboxes. So
sure,
I just thought I'd tie that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, if for those that are interested, I host Critical Thought every weekday, 9 to noon, and we talk about life and life issues and local and current news issues. So, yeah, and it is absolutely streamed to knoxradio.com. But anyway, I appreciate, Joey, you writing in, and for the traveling mailbox, I'm glad that's working. If you have an experience with a privacy-respecting mail service, or even if it's not dedicated to privacy and it's just more along the lines of dragging the USPS into the 21st century, I'd be interested in hearing from you at live at asknoahshow.com. Our third email comes in from Vincent. Vincent writes, says, "Hi, Vincent here. I've been using EOS from Murena on my Xiaomi Red Eye Note 8 I bought off of Amazon to get into the custom ROMs. It's a nice phone, and after purging the Chinese government spyware, like Android exorcists, anyway, EOS is Lineage OS with micro G app-based tracker blocking and some other neat features. It's advertised as a mobile privacy, easy but not restricting for users that can't live without Facebook or TikTok. Thanks for the great show. Here's a link," and he links to e.foundation. So I've taken a look at EOS in the past, and I just did a quick refresher for myself just to kind of get myself caught back up. Again, I love that there is a lot of competition in this space. I think this is one of the things that make when people had the debate, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and we were talking about, well, where is the greater evil between iOS, Apple, or Android? My argument all along has been Apple is the greater of the two evils. Why? Because with Apple, their software is closed source. In addition to their hardware only runs their software. So you have either an Apple device or a paperweight. Pick one. With Android, there's a couple of things that work to our advantage. Yes, the open source nature allows different carriers to put undue pressure on the software manufacturer to include a bunch of junk that us end users don't want. However, because we can get administrative access to the device, we can just erase that software and put whatever software we like. Kind of like we have been doing with Linux on laptops and desktops for years. So that is only possible because Google open sourced the Android operating system. So now people can take the parts that work to include the very important parts of the instructions to talk to the chipsets and build all sorts of stuff off of that. One of which is Lineage OS, one of which is Graphene OS, and now EOS or E.Foundation. So I've not played with this directly, but I've been following it for a little bit. It seems like it's a really cool service. It strikes me as kind of in between Lineage and Graphene OS. I would just add to say that you can absolutely take Google Play services out of Lineage OS. It doesn't come with it. And with Graphene OS, you can have Google services and just sandbox it. So I think it's just different ways to solve the same problem. But definitely would throw some attention to it. And if it's working for you, I think that's absolutely fantastic. If you have questions, write in live at asknoahshow.com. Of course, you can join us live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. We'll take your questions at 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live at asknoahshow.com. We'll head over to the Linux Newswire newsroom, check in with JT, and get the latest on this week's Linux and open source news.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of April 16th, 2023, here's the Linux and open source news. Deepin 20.9 has been officially released. Firefox 1.12 has been released. Digicam 8.0 has been released, along with the Qt6 port. The LXQT team has announced the release of LXQT 1.3 with Wayland support. Valve has released Proton 8. And FerretDB offers a drop-in replacement for MongoDB. Described by its creators as a truly open-source MongoDB alternative, Ferret has reached its 1.0 production release, with all the essential features capable of running document database workloads. FerretDB 1.0 is a stateless proxy that converts MongoDB protocol queries to SQL, using Postgres as the database engine. FerretDB enables Postgres and other database backends to run MongoDB workloads. Work is ongoing to support SQLite and SAP HANA. Universal Blue is a new Fedora-based distro using OSTree. Mercedes-Benz has made a 4-point press release claiming that the industry needs to sponsor and support open source development. There's an EU petition to create an open source AI research institute along the lines of CERN to prevent AI being owned and controlled by a few companies. Databricks has followed up its release of their large language model DALL-E with DALL-E 2.0 as the world's first open source instruction following LLM. More than a dozen open source industry bodies have published an open letter asking the European Commission to reconsider aspects of its proposed Cyber Resilience Act, saying that it will have a chilling effect on open source software if development is implemented in its current form. In the US, the Securing Open Source Software Act has passed the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee and moves onwards toward the Senate floor. According to the press release from the Department of Homeland Security, this bill would include a risk framework around open source code. CISA would take the leading role in developing this framework, which would be used across the federal government and organizations and companies operating critical infrastructure. The bill passed the committee with an 11-1 vote. Rand Paul gave the dissenting vote, stating that he is concerned that this bill will create federal regulation of open source software and will kill a thriving area of innovation. Paul has proposed an amendment to the legislation to limit CISA's control to regulate all open source software. The Linux Foundation has released a schedule for the Embedded Open Source Summit in late June in Prague. SUSE has released a new version of Rancher with a strong focus on security hardening. Google has released an emergency Chrome security update to address a zero-day vulnerability targeted by an exploit that is already in circulation on the internet that can allow malicious code to be executed. And lastly, security vendor Sonatype has detected 6,933 malicious open source packages in the month of March alone, bringing the total discovered since 2019 to over 115,000.
We talk a lot on this program about using tools and how they can be beneficial, but it's always an interesting perspective to me when somebody comes over from the proprietary world and comes over into open source land. So joining me for this segment is Kenny Schmidt, lead installer and service technician at Altispeed Technologies. Welcome in, sir.
Thanks for having me on the show today.
It has been a hot minute since you've been in the studio.
It has. Thanks for having me back. It's been great.
So I want to talk to you a little bit. It's not an exaggeration to say your entire adult life you've worked in some form of production, right?
Absolutely.
That was one of your first jobs, and it progressed. You volunteer at church. You have done a lot in the way of individual contracting work.
Absolutely.
And you actually worked for a promotions company for a period of time. So you have a lot of professional experience. And coming into that, you come from a series of proprietary tools. Can you talk a little bit about what your initial impressions were when you started to look at things? You started with, was it Adobe Premiere and CorelDRAW and some of those? What were your first impressions when you started to come over to Inkscape and Kdenlive, and what were your initial impressions?
Absolutely. So when I first started looking at a lot of these projects, I had low expectations, right, from because when you think about comparing a product that has a very large customer base like Premiere Pro or CorelDRAW or Illustrator or any of these big market leaders of their programs, I had low expectations, right? Because we're going from a large company that has lots of users, that has lots of money being dumped into it. So therefore, availability for a very large programming team to develop these tools.
Yeah.
So initially, my expectations with this was pretty low. Oh, it's a free thing. But due to my line of work, I've been moving more over to the Linux side of things, and I've really enjoyed the networking tools that come with the Linux things or the Linux environment. So for me, what it came down to was I'm already using this tool for work. I may as well at least try what they have for production tools like Kdenlive and Inkscape and all of these different tools. And I've been thoroughly impressed as we've moved through, and I've got to play with them a little bit more.
Yeah. So as you've started to use some of these tools, you've really dug into Kdenlive. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess let's start what you're using it for. Can you talk a little bit about what Godstrong Gym is and how you kind of got involved in what you're doing for them, and then what that has to do with Kdenlive?
Absolutely. So Godstrong Gym is essentially a men's ministry where a bunch of guys get together each week, multiple times throughout the week, and work out together, and discuss life together and experience that together as a whole. And part of Godstrong Gym, one of the things we do is just for the fun of it, and also for the fact of being able to go back and see progress or see a nitpick technique and kind of learn and grow from it, is each week we record promotional videos. So short, we call it their Instagram Reels is what they are really. So they're 90-second videos that have videos of us working out and just having fun in the gym, right? And we've done some other fun projects like a testimonial video where we had some of the people that go to the gym actually sit down, ask them some questions about why they're at the gym and all those different things. And we've then taken that and used open source software like Kdenlive to be able to edit these videos to look very professional and high end.
So you're living and breathing open source software now, particularly on the production end. Give me some of the nitty gritty details in Kdenlive. So just a little bit of backstory here. So you have just got done doing like an 8-hour video project that, produced a 90-second end product, but it was a tremendous amount of work. So what are some of the things that you liked about Kdenlive? What are some of your comment to me that kind of prompted this whole thing was you're like, I'm never going back. Like, yeah, it is cemented for me the efficacy of open source software. Can you talk about what your experience was like during some of these larger projects, and what some of the features that maybe people that use for just kind of lean, mean cutting machine wouldn't recognize or pull out of Kdenlive?
Absolutely. It's been incredible to see the development that Kdenlive has had over the last couple of years, and how good some of these free and open source softwares have become. Specifically, as I was going through it and showing Noah today some of the different things that I'd used in this project, it's truly incredible. So I have a short little bullet list of some of the features that I absolutely love that make editing projects like that, where you have 8 hours of work to do inside of a video editor, it makes it go by so much faster. So one of the things is, especially for me, as I was working on this project, I was working off of a laptop that didn't have a dedicated GPU. Okay. So I needed it to be able to render out certain portions of the video without having to sit there and wait for it to render an entire 90-second video out every single time. I just need to watch 4 or 5 seconds at a time.
How did that transition work?
Exactly. So I just want to check a change, basically view a change that I made to the edit, and I'm okay waiting 30 seconds, but I don't want to wait 5-10 minutes for a video rendered every single time I want to watch the video back. So one of the things that Kdenlive has added is render previews. So you set an in and an out point. So you basically say, this is where I want my render preview to start, and this is where I want it to end.
Tap O?
Exactly. Use keyboard shortcuts, very quick and efficient. And then you click the little render button, and it renders out that 5-second clip that you watched, and then you can preview it back in live time, just that section of the video. So it makes editing on a laptop on the go much more practical. It's not something that's like, well, it's impossible because I don't have a nice enough GPU in my laptop. Nope, you can do it on a laptop on the road, which was particularly helpful with me this week. I didn't end up having my desktop set up, so I was able to work off a laptop. So that was incredible. Next thing up is multicam editing. So multicam editing is the idea of taking, when you record a video, if you want to record the same thing from 2 different camera angles, it makes editing that incredibly simple. So you take 2 audio clips and you line the sound waves up.
Okay.
And a great way of doing this, best practice is, if you've ever seen in the movies, they have like the little clipboard where you can hit the thing, it goes and it claps.
Yeah.
You can do that as well, believe it or not, with just your hands and clapping.
I can just clap.
Yeah, you can just clap, and basically what you're looking for is being able to visually see your hands close, so that way you can see when they actually make contact, and then also the sine wave of the spike in the audio. You line those 2 sine waves up, or you can look and do it by seeing the clap as well. And then once you've gotten them lined up, you press play and you just start watching your video.
Okay.
And as you're watching your video, there's keyboard shortcuts. So you assign each channel basically a number. So say I have 2 video clips in my project that I was working on, a side angle and a front on angle. So I press play, I start watching the video, and I go.
And now, do you pull those into the timeline?
Correct. You pull those into the timeline, and in the actual tool, or in the actual program, under the Tools tab, there's a multicam tool. So you have to select this tool, and once you select this tool, it'll show a preview of both videos side by side.
So by default, you have each video in its own separate track. The multicam thing says, hey, we're only going to look at one of these at a time, and you're going to choose in real time which one we're looking at after the fact.
Exactly. So as you're watching it back, you can be making your cuts, basically.
Okay.
So my process that I do as I go along and do this is I bring my multicam footage in, I use my multicam footage, and then I use those shortcuts. So like 1 and 2 on the keypad if I have 2 videos, or 3 or 4 or 5, or how many cameras you had recording for that project, right?
Okay.
And then the other keyboard shortcut that I use that is such a saving grace is the guides tool. So the guides tool is really simple, but also incredibly effective.
What are guides?
So guides are little markers that you can put on the timeline with little descriptors. So as soon as you press the G key on the keyboard, as you're watching that playback, it'll leave a little marker on the key and the timeline, and you can choose a color for it. So you can do color coding if you're like, hey, for my project, it was a testimonial video. So someone would ask a question and the person would answer that question. So what I did when I was going through is I would mark all of the questions, and then I would type in, because the guides you can actually put labels on as well, so you can give them a title. So for this one, I did, when did you start coming to Godstrong Gym? That was the first guide that I put in, and I would do that for each of the questions that he asked.
So they're almost like notes inside of your video project.
Exactly. That's a fantastic way of doing it. You can color code them, you can label them, very flexible and very quick to add. So yeah, those 2 things in particular, when you're just getting that first rough draft of your edit, are instrumental to making a quick and speedy editing process. Past that, we have keyframing. So inside of Kdenlive, they make keyframing exceptionally easy. So keyframing, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially changing an effect that you've added to a video at different time points throughout the timeline.
Okay.
So if I want, say, for example, when I have the slide or the image that says, when did you start coming to Godstrong Gym? If I want the music to come up while they see that text, and then it to come back down when the person starts speaking, that's what you would use keyframes for, because I want just that section of the video to have an increase in audio.
I see.
So in Kdenlive, they make keyframing exceptionally easy, because what they do is they have a little user interface that sits on top of the clip that you can just make marks on it and then drag them up or down.
So those are those little points that you see when you click. It gives you a little dot, and then you can take that peak and pull it down or push it up depending on...
Exactly. Yep. And then they also do this with your most basic effects. So your fade in and fade out for video, and your fade in and fade out for audio as well. You can grab any corner of your clip and drag that left or right.
Gosh, that started for me in Sony Vegas, the esoteric piece of software that like half the world has never heard of. But it was great being able to just drag 2 clips in and then fade them by dragging the little corners. And now that stuff is available in Kdenlive. It's fantastic. And like you say, it works for audio and video.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't give high enough praise for Kdenlive and the work that they've done to put together a product like this.
So what's your takeaway to somebody who says, yeah, but Kenny, you don't understand. I have professional this, that, or the other, and I'm doing work that I'm getting paid, X amount of dollars for. So I need to have Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, whatever the thing is, iMovie.
The thing that I would tell you is at least give it a shot, because I was in that same boat when I very first started as a kid and just playing around with software. That's what I started with. I got the student and education plan of Adobe's products of their Creative Cloud. And that was where I started to learn the skills, just general creative skills of getting to edit and all of those different things. And that was how I thought as well. I thought I need the professional tool to do this thing. It's not possible to do it with free internet software. That's not possible. And what I would tell you is give it a shot. You'll find yourself very impressed with what Kdenlive is capable of.
Kdenlive is a professional video tool for those who know where to look.
Absolutely, yeah. And that goes to say with not just Kdenlive, but also some of their other open source products like Inkscape as well. My other strong suit was doing vector graphic as well as video editing. So I've found a lot of success with Inkscape as well.
Very cool. Hey, Kenny, I really appreciate the time. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Every once in a while, a piece of legislation comes out that absolutely affects us in the open source and really just internet freedom world. And that's the boat we find ourselves in lately with what's known as the Restrict Act. So this, you might have commonly seen it referred to as the TikTok ban bill. But Steve and I were having a conversation before the show, and Steve, you made an interesting comment. You said you find it laughable that people refer to it as a TikTok ban bill because it's so broad. How do you even take that away?
Yeah, the other thing that's really interesting is that from what I've read, so I've only read the summations because while I do tend to like to dive in deep, I haven't done so in this one. But from what I've read in the summations, TikTok is not actually mentioned anywhere. Instead, we have very broad language in here that, and again, I don't think Noah or I would claim to be any kind of lawyer, but
no,
when you read it, you're like, this doesn't seem like it would pass any constitutional challenge ever.
Yeah, that's largely what the experts are saying. So it starts with something called the Data Act, and this was introduced by Representative McCall, a Republican from Texas, who filed the Federal Data Act under H.R. 1153. So this House committee approved it on a party line vote, and the bill essentially requires executive officials to ban U.S. persons from engaging in what they're calling any transaction with somebody who may transfer certain personal data to foreign persons who is the subject of influence in China or to that nation's jurisdiction under intellectual or direct ownership. So I had an opportunity to talk with Senator Kramer, and I asked him a little bit about Intel and how the Chinese go about collecting those things, and he had this to say.
Under their laws, to Terry's point, that they are required to spy if they can, and other countries learned this lesson sooner than we did, and chief among them Australia. There's Australia right in the neighborhood. China's their number one market, obviously. They've risked a lot, they've given up a lot, they've sacrificed a lot to try to correct their own ship and clean their own house. Particularly when it comes to students who were on assignment in their institutions to literally steal intellectual property.
And so if the government of China tells them, hey, you are required to turn this information over to us, if it's a Chinese-based company, they have to do that. Additionally, they have targets inside of the U.S. where they're trying to affect a change. And sometimes it comes in the way of overt threats, but other times it's a little bit more insidious. They come after family members, and Senator Kramer told me that was actually one of the first things he was told when he came into the U.S. Senate.
One of the first warnings I got when I became a senator is not a warning I received in the House, but when I came over to the Senate, and particularly on the Senate Armed Services Committee, was to be aware and to warn my family about opportunities that might come their way for employment, for contracts, for business opportunities, for relationships with people from China.
So as the U.S. government becomes more concerned about this, there are attempts now to try to rein in. The problem is, for lack of a better way to say this, the people that are coming up with this stuff don't really understand data privacy. They don't really understand data security, and they're conflating this with a massive First Amendment free speech issue that has the EFF wrapped up from here to kingdom come. And the EFF has published two excellent articles. They're ripping good reads, and I would invite you to read them start to finish. I'll have a link for you in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. But the short version is there is the Data Act, which requires executive action to do something. The Restrict Act is a step further. So essentially what it does is it authorizes the executive branch to block transactions and foreign adversaries that involve information, communication, and technology, and then create an undue or acceptable risk for national security. If I was to shorten that up a little bit, the TLDR it's the Patriot Act on steroids. And so the Restrict Act applies to right now 6 foreign adversaries: China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela, but they can be expanded to other countries. And I think what is being hailed as a TikTok ban is much, much more than that. So the CFIUS process is essentially a process that companies in the United States go through to determine if foreign entities are a threat to the United States, and they have to approve that CFIUS process. They have to pass that. So ByteDance, the American company the Chinese company who owns TikTok, originally called Musical.ly, back in 2019, went through the CFIUS process in order to verify the purchase. And in response, TikTok committed to a plan that they called Project Texas. And essentially Project Texas is the company would spend $1.5 billion on systems overseen by CFIUS to block the flow of data from TikTok to ByteDance, thereby eliminating China's ability to ascertain that data. So questions have come up around the efficacy of, can they do that? If this company is willing to abide by this plan, does that actually stop the flow of data to Chinese officials? And you've watched a slow erosion of this over time. First, they started banning TikTok on government-owned devices. Then they came after schools. And I was talking to our news director, and I was like, "Can you help me wrap my head around this?" So colleges all over the country ban TikTok and don't want it on their state campus network. Okay, fine, got it. China bad, whatever. So they do that, and then their very next reaction is, well, hold on a second. We need a marketing budget to get onto TikTok. Well, I thought you just said we were trying to get off of TikTok. Well, yeah, we are, but that's where all the students are, and they just shut their Wi-Fi off, and they roll over to cellular data, and then they're back on TikTok. So now we have to get on TikTok so we can market to the people that we took off the university's network to get them off of the thing that we said was bad. It's so backwards. The people making these decisions don't understand what they're doing. And for the life of me, having read over both of these acts numerous times, I fail to understand how this is going to achieve the desired effect. Now, Reason.com has a really interesting write-up on this. Their take on this, and granted they're stretching a little bit here, but their take on this is, if you read broadly enough, you could interpret the Restrict Act to say that if you're an American citizen, so everybody has probably done this, right? If you've traveled to another country, you go to watch Netflix or something like that, and, this isn't available in your country. What do? You sign up for private internet access, you log into a California server, or a Denver server, or wherever, and you connect, and then you carry on watching your streaming service. And I've seen people do that in other countries who want access to stuff. Here's the thing that kills me. Up until 5 minutes ago, the country to remote into, because we had maximum absence of coercion and all the freedom under the sun, was the United States of America. And now we're changing that paradigm to be, you could interpret the Restrict Act to say, if you're using a VPN to bypass this, well, is that you using a communication system to create undue or unacceptable risk to the United States? Maybe. Who's to say, right? Who gets to be the arbiter of that? And so the Reason has this really excellent write-up that basically ascertains that this legislation would direct the president to use the International Emergency Economic Power Act to block or prohibit all transactions and to prevent commercial operations of TikTok and their parent company ByteDance in the U.S. Additionally, the Secretary of Commerce could use their broad power and in the bill's words, identify, deter, disrupt, prevent, or prohibit, investigate, or otherwise mitigate any risk for any covered transaction or person with respect to any property that the Secretary determines to pose an undue, unacceptable risk. So what does that? So if somebody just decides, hey, that VPN service poses an undue, unacceptable risk, does that mean that you're just not allowed to use a VPN to connect outside of what the government blesses as okay? The other thing that is highly concerning to me about this, other companies are jumping on the bandwagon to eliminate a competitor, because the reality is large companies like Google and large companies like Meta or Facebook, they're not really all that concerned about government regulation because they can pay off politicians. You know what they're really concerned about? The next guy that wants to start Facebook, the next guy that wants to start whatever Google's current implementation of whatever it was, that would YouTube, I suppose, YouTube Shorts. So these companies have started to jump on this bandwagon, Meta paying a consulting firm to orchestrate a nationwide campaign to turn the public against TikTok. And so we're trying to raise awareness about this and draw some attention to the fact that this is a terrible idea. This is the kind of thing that I would encourage you to call. If you live inside of the United States, call your representatives, call your senators, email them, reach out with a contact form and say, this is not okay. I agree with the idea of keeping Americans' data safe. I agree with keeping all users' data safe. I agree with the idea of keeping things private and out of the hands of companies. I agree with the idea that we shouldn't let totalitarian states use social media to target people. All of those things are good intentions, and all of those things are good technological things to do. But these bills don't address almost any of it. It just hands a sweeping new powers to the federal government and doesn't really address the problem. So, Steve, you're kind of you're a pretty freedom-respecting guy. You try to, maximum absence of coercion and all the rest of it. What are your thoughts when it comes to the Restricta or the Data Act? Do you think that it at least addresses the concerns that people have about their information winding up over in China?
Not really. There's all kinds of ways to twist and turn and get away with shifting data around and all of the rest of that. And again, this is not an anti-Microsoft bias, but if we look at what was happening with Microsoft in Ireland back only a couple of years ago, and there was a big brouhaha about who owned the data and where it was, regardless of which country it owned, the data center was in. Do you recall all of this?
Do.
So we did that with an American-owned company when we were spatting with Ireland over who remembers what, right? Like, at the end of the day, it was some 2-bit criminal, possibly, allegedly, that had angered somebody, and now we're tussling with a supposed ally over this sort of thing. And so all that to say is, if the company who is large enough to store and gather data wants to, they can find a way to wriggle out of this, just like ByteDance can. And I'd like to point out that while I absolutely despise TikTok and everything that it seems to represent, I think that some of the American firms that are founded have done more harm. I think TikTok is just a bunch of idiots, drooling over their screen. I think that there's a bunch of more nefarious stuff at work from Meta and other places where they're actively harvesting and just being general ne'er-do-wells with the data that they're gathering. At least to date, I am not aware of any social experiments that ByteDance is playing by, changing people's 30-second shorts around, whereas we know that Facebook has been doing that. So all that to say is, if the purpose of this is to actually be in the public interest, then, it's one of those things that I advocate for in life too. When people say, "Oh, well, you should give money to the Ethiopians or whomever," I look at that and say, "But we have poor people in our own city. Why am I sending the money out to do that?" And so it's the same thing here. It's like, you want to go clean up somebody else's backyard when you've literally lit a tire fire in your backyard. Just completely ignore that. Like, that's not really the best way to handle this.
We'll start with the American companies. When we get them under control, then we'll start going international and policing the rest of the world. Yeah,
I'm not in favor of control, period. I I don't like it wherever it is. But if you are insistent on, I need to patrol this for the children, as is the want for so many people, then like, how about targeting the biggest offenders?
You know, the other thing that occurs to me, and it was in response to something else. It was in response to the leaked documents, the leaked Pentagon documents from Jack Teixeira. But Elon Musk had an interesting quote. And basically people were asking him like, well, are you going to clean up the internet? Are you going to clean up Twitter to make sure to get all these documents off there because people are leaking it and this is problematic? And are you going to do your part? And his answer was basically, he came back and said, listen, that just isn't how the internet works. Like, I wish it were, but the reality is you don't get to go clean stuff off the internet and delete it, because all that does is draw more attention to the thing that you were trying to hide in the first place. And it's a very down-to-earth, realistic take on how this stuff actually plays out in practice. And so when I start looking at, okay, if we set our objective at, we want Americans to be less on TikTok, or we want the world to be less on TikTok because China controls it and we think that's bad. Okay, fine. So how would we effectively go about doing that? We would have to convince people to make different choices. And trying to ban something or trying to prevent somebody from accessing something on the internet has literally never worked ever. And oh, by the way, that is largely the kinds of things that China is doing that we're upset with them in the first place, right? So to me, the answer to a free speech problem is more free speech. If you think there's a problem with this platform over here, go demonstrate to me why Mastodon is a superior platform and doesn't come with the human rights violations that you're telling me TikTok does, and then people will just make of their own volition and of their own accord will just move over. But until you can do that, the vast majority of people are going to be like, oh man, it's blocked here now, I have to use, and then whatever tool it is to get back on the platform. So yes, I'm sure there'll be a certain range of the sheeple that will pull their phone out of their pocket and they tap on the icon they tap on and it doesn't work anymore and they go, shucks, I'm out of luck. But the people that really want to be on that platform are going to be on that platform, and it won't be. And if you think that information isn't being harvested by other countries because they're posting it on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever else, you're dead wrong. That information is all over the place, and it's being scraped up and hoovered up by numerous governments, not just China.
I think that this is, if I was going to give an everyday analogy, and you campaign because we don't want people to pee in the pool, and then you make a rule about all of the buildings that people can go in as a way to make a broad sweeping thing. It's like, well, no, if your goal is to stop people from peeing in the pool, then ban urination in the pool. Don't stop people from going in places. Like if your stated goal is this, here's the thing. We know, okay, let's assume this wasn't controversial. Okay. Let's assume that this thing is legitimate society good. What we know is every time that the government makes broad sweeping regulation, it doesn't matter which government it is, if there's any kind of legal structure there, they'll find a way to drive a truck through that, right? If you are not precise enough in your dealings, there's going to be one court or another which is going to rule that, the interpretation of this law is too broad, and therefore, whatever, we're going to allow this guy with all the money to get off from this charge. So if you're going, like, if this is for the public good, then, you don't need all kinds of flowery language. You would literally just put TikTok is prohibited in United States ISPs. End of story.
Yeah, you're right. If the problem was even TikTok, and I think the larger problem is we don't like it when there's another country that has an app or a platform that a bunch of people are on and we don't have control over it. I think that bothers us really more than anything else. I think we disguise that concern as, oh, well, it's unhealthy for, and I've seen all sorts of stuff. I saw a report, a senator was talking about how he believed China was intentionally using TikTok to amplify stupid things so that it draws Americans into engaging in stupid activities. And his argument for that was there is a equivalent of TikTok in China that is used by the Chinese people, and they have like self-help and promotional style things, not stupid, eating Tide Pods and getting out of cars with them dancing around the street, whatever else goes on these days. that was his example, is to demonstrate as to why this is so problematic. And to that, my thought is just, if that is the concern, you're fighting a losing battle, because you're essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to prevent people from doing what they organically want to do or what they're organically attracted to. I just don't see how you can force that by the rule of law, nor do I think it's the government's job to do that. Vibrant Golik in the chat room says, national corporate governments, give us your money that you did hard labor for and produce, and we'll transfer it to ourselves. And our central banks are cartels, NGOs, and international corporations, and useless imported populations will never be held accountable for misspending. And then he goes on to cite a bunch of examples, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. So in any event, this is not a good thing. It is absolutely something we need to take a stand. And for the most part, we try to focus on the good, awesome things that are happening in the Linux and open source world. But this is one of those deals where we need you to be able to step up and contact your representatives to say, this is not the way forward. This is not good. Technological stewards would not do this if the goal is to protect data. We can protect data by using single-sided encryption, client-side encryption. We can protect data by helping people leverage technology to its full potential and understanding the code that's behind there. There was a news story in Linux Newswire talking about federal frameworks for governing open source software. All of those things are at least potential avenues to gaining the ability to leverage control over our data and over the software that we use. But just blanketly handing untold powers to the federal government without any sort of transparency, without any sort of requirements, and frankly, vague words, as Steve so eloquently put it, that you could drive a bus through. This is not how you legitimately address privacy concerns on social media platforms. It's a distraction from real progress, and you need to tell the administration and you need to tell your representatives that this is not the way forward. And so the EFF has it's act.eff.org. I'll have the exact link in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. But it's really neat. They have a little applet, and you type in your street address and your zip code, and you say, find my reps, and it will spit out and say, here's how you contact your representative. And they even have so they have the contact information, and then they have, you can put in like, hey, I am, Mr. So-and-so, and I want to reach out to this person, and it has a little wizard, and you click next, and then it will walk you through, how to contact them and what all to do. And so I'd highly encourage you guys to do that, and gals to do that. It is absolutely something that requires our attention. Red Hat Summit is upon us. Red Hat Summit 2023. So Ask Noah Show, Mindrip Media will be out there. We'll be broadcasting live. We'll get a look at what's happening at Steve's company of employment and see what they're doing and what the latest things with Red Hat are and how enterprise is being shaped by Linux in the open source world. I remember years ago when we started, it was a function of, it was something exciting to see open source and Linux inside of the business environment. These days, it's kind of like an expectation. People start with, I want an open source and non-locked-in solution, then they kind of work backwards from there. And then the request for papers is open for SELF 2023. So if you're interested in talking with SELF, it'll be June 9th, 10th, and 11th, I believe. I think that's right. And so, the conference will be 9th, 10th, and 11th, but if you want to give a talk at SELF, papers are open, and you're welcome to send in your talks. Again, it's all chosen off of merit. Everything is stripped away. It is just the title and the description, and so it is chosen based on the merit of the talk. But if you'd like to do that, we invite you to send that in. You can learn more at southeastlinuxfest.org. The music in our ears means we're out of time. Thank you for joining us. We record this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. If you'd like to stay up to date with the latest, you can follow us on Twitter at Ask Noah Show. I'm at Colonel Linux. He's at Linux Ovens. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.